Chapter 1. Beneath the Hollow Hill. From the Journal of Bram, serf of the Pale Host. I awoke in silence so thick it felt like a slab pressed against my chest. My eyes opened into darkness, complete, no flicker of flame, no gleam of moon through cracks. Just black, absolute, and swallowing. I could not move. Earth weighted every limb. Dust filled my nose, mouth, eyes. I choked, gagged, and was greeted not with the wet rattle of breath, but the dry scrape of ancient dust against rotted throat. My fingers clawed upward through stone-laced soil, weak and shaking, until they found cold air. Air. Not warm or living, but still. It was not death. I dragged myself free like a worm from rotted meat. Fingernails torn, one arm numb. My spine cracked as I twisted from the sepulchral maw into the barrow chamber beyond. There was no sound. Only the sense of vast weight above, of layers upon layers of age, pressing down upon this tomb, as if the world itself wished to forget what lay beneath. And then I saw him, Caltheron, the Wight King. He stood in the heart of the barrow chamber, encased in silence. No fire lit the space, yet he was visible etched in pallid clarity by some lightless glow, as though memory itself illuminated his form. His crown was wrought from rusted bronze and shards of jawbone. His armor, blackened steel marked with runes older than any empire tongue, hung from his wasted frame like the skin of a flayed god. His eyes empty, sockets burned, not with fire, but with a hunger older than fire. Around him they rose, the Pale Host. They did not groan. They did not scream. They did not lurch with the mindless hunger of common undead. They remembered. Each of them, knights in splintered mail, spearmen with thorn-cracked hands still clutched around, halves long fused to bone, standard-bearers whose banners bore glyphs no man now lives to read. They rose in perfect silence, as if summoned not by magic, but by debt. And I was one of them, not dead, not yet, but marked. I stumbled toward him, legs shaking, tears of dust sliding down my cheeks. A lifetime ago, I had died beneath this hill. Not with sword in hand, but with rope around my neck, hung for theft from a corpse that belonged to the king. He had claimed me even then. Now, I served. The Wight King turned, bones grinding within his plated shell, and looked upon me. That eyeless gaze was like a blade driven into my soul. I knelt without command, pressing my forehead into the dirt of the barrow floor. In my skull, not words but presence. A cold vastness, a weight that crushed thought, leaving only obedience. "It is time," the presence said. I nodded, unable to speak. The walls of the tomb groaned, not from any tremor or wind, but as if the very earth objected to their rising. Moss disintegrated, root and stone withered. The hill itself, once a burial mound beneath which no man dared tread, split like a cracked skull. The Wight King strode through the shattered opening. His host followed, bones clattering in ritual rhythm, weapons low, eyes forward, and I still breathing, still cursed, followed behind. I thought the night air would bring relief. It did not. The world above was wrong. Trees wept ash. The sky, once clear, now churned with clouds of bruise and bone. Birds lay dead in their nests. The moon wept rusted light. Our return had been prophesied by no one. No chance foretold it, no priest dared dream it. And yet the earth knew. Caltheron walked the path once, tread only in death. Not toward war, not toward conquest, but pilgrimage. The Pale Host marched uncountable, unwavering, and behind them, in rags and blood, I followed, bearing the name of the living among the dead. Thus began the dread pilgrimage, and I swear, by all the hollow gods of dust and darkness, the world will not forget us again. Chapter 2. The Bone Procession. There are no horns in this army. No drums, no banners, no cries of war or roars of pride. Only the sound of bones, thousands of them clicking, grinding, knocking against old iron, rusted mail, and the world that has forgotten them. The pale host marches. Each footfall strikes the ground like a judgment rendered. The first day, I tried to count them Caltheron's legion of the dead. I gave up before dusk. It is not an army in the way men think. It is a tide. We move in columns, too vast to see end to end. Shields etched with glyphs, long erased from stone. Blades pitted with time, but still sharp enough to peel back the skin of the world. Skeletons march in silence, their skulls bobbing on ancient sinew. Armored knights whose eye sockets burn with dull, coal-colored fire. Some still wear the tattered remnants of the tabards they died in, symbols of kingdoms long since consumed by dirt. A few carry relics bound in bone and gold, objects I dare not name, for they pulse with memory and murder. And I still, cursed with breath, I walk among them. The rot has become my air. The stench is a constant veil around me. Sour flesh, old iron, ancient blood. But it's not just the dead. The land itself recoils from our passing. Grass wilts. Trees lean away, branches snapping as if wrenched back by invisible hands. Animals flee long before we arrive. Dogs run themselves dead. Crows gather not to feast, but to follow. And the cold gods, the cold. It bleeds out from the Wight King in pulses. It is not weather, not wind, not snow. It is the death of heat itself. I wear every scrap of cloth I own, and still I shiver until my bones grind like those of the host. Fire won't take. Sparks die in the air. I haven't felt my fingers in days. By the third day of the march, we reached the first village. A hamlet unnamed on any map. Simple wooden homes. Chickens in pens. Smoke curling from thatch roofs. Then the host appeared on the hill above them. They looked up. Some screamed. Others fell to their knees. A few ran. But Caltheron did not raise his blade. We passed through the fields. The undead walked among the scarecrows and through the wheat without touching it. No sword drawn. No banner raised. Just the rhythmic clatter of bone and iron. The villagers did not fight. They did not flee. They watched in stunned silence as we walked straight down the muddy road that split their homes. Dogs barked, then whimpered and went quiet. The air became still, thick like old broth. Time slowed. A woman dropped her bucket at a well, as a wight passed within inches of her, an armored corpse with a half-shattered jaw and a skull split by some forgotten axe. He did not turn. He did not see her. He only walked. Caltheron's stride never changed. The king moved like a man in prayer, measured, grave, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The others followed as if chained to him by soul and silence. When we passed, the villagers didn't speak. They didn't scream. They just stopped. Hours later, I looked back. The village still stood, but it was dead. Windows shut, doors closed, smoke gone. Even the chickens had stopped clucking. I called it a ghost town in my thoughts. But that's wrong. Ghosts suggest something remains. That place was hollowed, emptied. As if the presence of our host had scooped the spirit from the people like marrow from cracked bone. They became memory. Each night, I sleep on the edge of the camp. Not that the dead sleep. They stand in ranks, unmoving, unbreathing. Some dig small pits in the earth and sit cross-legged inside them, as if returning to the grave before the next day's march. Others polish weapons with cloth that disintegrates in their hands. Some pray without words, without sound. I watch Caltheron from afar. He does not speak. He does not eat. He stands in the center of his legion, sword stabbed into the earth like a monument. His crown gleams in starlight that refuses to touch the rest of us. I feel his presence always pressing at the edges of my skull, a weight in my gut like swallowed stone. He is not a king of conquest. He is a king of memory. And memory, I am learning, is the cruelest form of undeath. On the 6th night, we passed another village. No torches, no eyes peering from shutters, no scent of food, no whisper of life. They had fled before we arrived, or they had died without resistance. The pale host did not notice. They walked through abandoned homes. Some of the dead paused not to loot, but to stand in certain places. One knelt in a stable and touched the dirt floor. Another placed his cracked helm on a wellstone and left it there. I swear by every wretched saint of Moor, he wept. I saw bone shudder, heard the faintest rattle, not of rage, not of sorrow, of remembrance. Caltheron said nothing, but I felt something pass between them, some current of thought older than words. The Wight King walks not for blood, he walks for the past, for the cairns, for the barrows, for a time when his crown meant something older than empire, older than Sigmar, older than gods. We are not marching toward war, we are marching toward the grave, and the world should tremble, because when the dead remember, the living are already forgotten. Chapter 3. Cairn of the First Slain. We reached the hill just after dusk, though time meant little to the dead. The wind died the moment the pale host crested the ridge, snuffed like a candle under the hand of a jealous god. Trees stood still in reverence or fear, their skeletal branches raised as if praying to something that no longer listened. The grass, once brittle and frost-stained, now lay flat, as though every blade bent in obeisance. Even the insects had fled. All that remained was the march, the dry symphony of bones grinding beneath rusted iron, of mail chains hissing like snakes through the silence. The cairn rose from the earth like the spine of some colossal beast, its stones half consumed by moss and centuries of rot. No markers, no banners, no name. The Empire had long forgotten this place, scrubbed it from maps, paved roads far from it. But Caltheron remembered, and so did those who walked with him. The Wight King halted atop a low ridge and raised a single, clawed hand. The host froze at once. Not one staggered, not a sound escaped the ranks. They stood as if turned to salt-silent tombstones in the shape of warriors. I felt their awareness coil inward like vultures, circling their own bones. Caltheron descended the slope toward the cairn, each step measured, deliberate. I followed behind, boots sinking into soil that felt too soft, too wet, though the air was dry. There was a wrongness here. Something beneath the surface stirred, not just decay, but memory. A pressure built behind my eyes, as if I were drowning in invisible water. The king stopped before the cairn's heart. A slab of black stone jutted from the earth, cracked down its center, its surface etched with symbols even the undead would not speak aloud. I couldn't read them, but I felt them. They pressed against my skull, wormed into my tongue, made my teeth itch. Caltheron knelt, and the dead knelt with him. 10,000 warriors collapsed to one knee in perfect unison. Bones groaned. Spears were planted into the soil like grave markers. Shields thudded down. Even those whose legs were gone lowered themselves as if the gesture mattered more than the flesh enacting it. And then the Wight King sang. No words, not in any tongue I knew. It was a chant, deep and slow, crawling up from the hollow of his ribs. It echoed not from his throat, but from within the cairn itself, as though the earth responded. The sound was wrong, too old, too real. It made my stomach turn and bile rise in my throat. The stones around us trembled, dust pouring from the cairn's peak like blood from a fresh wound. The song deepened. Bones in the cairn cracked in rhythm. Something beneath stirred. Not a ghost, not a memory. A presence. The slab before us split with a sound like shattering teeth. I staggered back, heart jackhammering, skin crawling. The scent of ages poured out not just of death, but of betrayal, of ancient rage sealed too long. The ground split in hairline fractures that radiated outward like the web of a spider the size of mountains. Caltheron rose. He stepped forward, past the ruined slab, into the gaping maw now torn into the hill. The air grew colder still, impossibly so. My breath came in needles. The others did not move, did not waver. They knelt in solemn silence, as though praying to a god who might kill them again just for speaking. Then it came. A sound. From the black. Not a growl. Not a roar. A whimper. Something in that tomb still lived, or worse, remembered living. I dropped to my knees, head spinning. Visions clawed at my thoughts. Vast fields covered in banners before the time of man, of kings carved from obsidian and crowned in gold, still wet with blood. I saw Keltheron as he once was alive, whole, crowned in bone and glory, kneeling at the feet of a being that wore death like a robe. That being was still inside the cairn, and it was waking. Keltheron spoke not aloud, but within my skull. The voice was quieter now, like wind through catacombs. Bear witness, Bram, for this is where it began. The cairn split wider, stone giving way like flesh under rusted steel. I crawled forward, unable to resist. Within, the blackness was so total it drank the light of Keltheron's crown. And in the dark, I saw eyes. Not two, dozens. Not bright, but deep sockets filled not with fire, but with gravity. Each gaze pinned me like an insect, dissecting me down to memory and marrow. My jaw locked, my mouth filled with the taste of dirt and old blood. And then the figure stepped out. It was not tall, not armored, not crowned. It was shrouded, limbs thin as roots, flesh gray as stone left in a swamp, eyes like coins forged before time. Runes floated about it, circling slowly, each casting a cold pallor of unreality. No weapon, no voice. And yet it moved with such authority that Keltheron Wight, King of the Pale Host, breaker of empires, bowed low, forehead touching earth. I should have fled, screamed, prayed. Instead, I watched as Keltheron removed his crown, placed it at the figure's feet, and knelt again. There was no ceremony, no proclamation, only a moment of ancient, frozen reverence. The figure reached out, its fingers thin, bone white. It touched Keltheron's shoulder. A flash of something passed between them, lightless, soundless, but so terrible, I felt my own heart miss a beat. Not love, not loyalty, obligation. And then the thing smiled. It turned and retreated into the cairn, vanishing like mist drawn into stone. The runes followed, fading as they passed the threshold. The hill began to knit shut, stone grinding slowly into place, the slab melting back into wholeness, cracks vanishing like scabbed wounds healed without care. Keltheron did not speak. He stood, turned, and reclaimed his crown, not with pride, not with power, but with weight, a burden renewed. His fire dimmed subtly, but I saw it. The army rose once more, as one, the cairn sealed behind us. I understood then. We were not only marching towards something, we were fleeing from something, or perhaps we were being sent. The pale host began to move again. No order, no sound, just the click and scrape of memory animating corpses long past their due. I followed, feet numb, lips split from cold and fear. The cairn burned behind my eyes. The figure's smile haunted the backs of my lids. That thing was not a king. It was a relic, a priest, a warden. And Keltheron was not the first of his kind, only the first to return. As I stumbled into step behind the host, my blood still frozen, my soul still ringing from the song, one truth gnawed at me worse than rot. Whatever lies at the end of this pilgrimage, Keltheron fears it, and God's help us if we ever reach it. Chapter 4. Screams from the gallows hollows. The trees changed first. You could feel it, not just in the soil, but in the air, like walking into a room where something unspeakable had happened, long after the blood was scrubbed away, but long before the scent had faded. It wasn't rot. Rot was familiar, earthy, expected. This was sharper, older, like copper, like burnt hair and bile, and the final breath of a man who died screaming with his throat still open. They called it the Gallows Hollows, the forest that lay sunken between two ridges east of the crippled road. I had never heard its name spoken, not in my youth, not even in the whispers of drunkards or madmen. But Keltheron knew it. His path bent toward it not out of necessity, but intent, as though some obligation, some long-forgotten pact, drew him into its boughs. We descended into it at twilight, The trees were dead, but they still stood, bark ashen and flaking, branches like clawed fingers frozen mid-scratch. No leaves, no moss, nothing grew here. The birds vanished. Even the crows abandoned us. A bad sign, that. Crows were faithful followers of our host. If they feared what lay ahead, then what, by the withered gods, did that make me? The pale host did not hesitate. I did. My legs slowed at the edge of the tree line. Something in my gut twisted, tightened like a noose. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded, not with exertion but panic, wild and primal. I stared into that forest and saw nothing. No movement, no light, not even the flicker of bone. But I felt it. A presence, vast and suffocating, older than Caltheron, older than death itself. He glanced back, just once. A flicker of acknowledgement. Not warmth, never warmth, but a push, a command, silent and terrible. So I followed. The instant I passed beneath the first bough, I heard the rope. It was faint, just a creak, like the shift of leather stretched too tight. But I knew the sound. Every man who's seen an execution knows it. The creak of a hanging body swaying in the wind, neck broken, weight slack and heavy. But here, it didn't come from one rope, or 10. It came from hundreds. I looked up. They hung from the trees like fruit. Bodies. Men, women, children. Old and new. Skeletal and bloated. Some wore the rags of beggars. Others the faded remnants of uniforms from a dozen different ages. Their feet dangled, toes scraping bark, some swinging, some still. Nooses twisted around necks worn thin. Eye sockets stared hollow, accusing, and then they screamed. It started as a low moan, like the breath of wind caught in a crypt. But it grew, and grew, and grew, until the forest howled. It wasn't one voice. It wasn't even 1,000. It was all of them. Every corpse on every limb. Screaming in chorus, not in pain, not even in warning, but in witness. The sound pierced the air like shards of glass, jagged and endless. My hands flew to my ears, but it made no difference. The screams weren't just heard, they were felt. They rattled my teeth, crawled beneath my skin. My nose bled. My ears wept red. I dropped to my knees, vomited. The pale host marched on, undisturbed. The dead did not scream back. They did not falter. Their pace did not shift. But I saw some of them look, just slightly. Skulls turned toward the hanging bodies. Helmets angled upward. Not in recognition, but in deference. These weren't enemies. They were judges, witnesses to sins long buried. Not just executions, but massacres, betrayals, purges in the name of gods now crumbled to dust. The gallows hollows had seen the truth of man, and it had never stopped watching. One of the hanging figures twisted violently above me, his rope swinging in a circle as if yanked by some unseen fury. His jaw hung slack, throat long torn, but still, he screamed. His eyes were gone, sockets empty. Yet I felt him look at me. "Why do you walk with them?" The voice wasn't sound. It was inside. A pressure against my skull, a whisper behind my teeth. I bit my tongue to silence the scream clawing up my throat. Another body began to thrash. A woman, her face black with rot, fingers chewed to bone. Her mouth opened wide, far too wide, and she screeched like boiling blood. "Did you hang me, serf? Did you cheer when my legs kicked?" "I watched them burn," a child wailed from above. "And now you walk with the fire." I stumbled, covering my head, trying to block them out. But the pale host kept walking, and the forest kept screaming. The Wight King walked at the center, his crown dim beneath the choked light. But I saw his posture change, straighten. His hand gripped his blade tighter, the runes along its edge flaring dull crimson. Not in threat, in acknowledgement. He had passed this way before. The screams reached a pitch that defied sense. Birds of bone shattered mid-flight. My left eardrum ruptured. I felt the wet pop and the gush of warmth. Blood streamed down my neck. Still I followed, crawling, half blind, breath ragged, screaming myself, though I couldn't hear it. And then, All at once it stopped. The silence returned with the violence of a guillotine. One moment, chaos. The next, nothing. No wind, no breath. Just the creak of rope again, slow, steady. I dared to look up. The bodies had turned. All of them. Every corpse now faced the Wight King. Their mouths shut, their limbs still. The forest was frozen. In a moment of eternal reverence, or terror, Caeltheron raised his sword. Not in defiance, in salute. A gust of wind tore through the hollows like a breath held for centuries, and finally exhaled. The trees shuddered, the ropes swung, and the corpses began to vanish. Not fall, not rot, they simply faded. Their forms unraveling into ash and silence, drifting upward into the canopy where even the crows dared not perch. In moments, they were gone. All of them. Only the ropes remained tied to nothing, swaying gently in the now still air. The pale host moved forward. I stumbled to my feet. My legs shook. My vision swam. I wiped blood from my ears with a hand that did not feel like mine. My mouth still hung open, though I no longer screamed. Caeltheron passed me as he walked. He did not speak, but as he moved beyond the tree line, I saw his shoulders sag, just slightly. A weight lifted, a price paid, or perhaps a reckoning survived. We left the gallows hollows behind, but the ropes swayed still, and I knew that they would hang full again soon enough. For the dead may forget, the living may deny, but the forest never sleeps, and it always remembers. Chapter 5. Blood in the Dust. There is something in the sound of horses dying that cannot be forgotten. It's not the scream of a man, nor the bellow of a beast. It's worse. A wet, bubbling shriek that ends with a crunch so final it silences everything around it. Not because of fear, because of reverence. Even death holds its breath in the moment a warhorse dies. I heard that sound today. We were crossing a long stretch of scorched heathland, brittle underfoot, stained with salt and soot. The pale host moved in its eternal rhythm, silent, precise, unstoppable. The sun had broken through the low clouds just enough to bathe the dead in a pale, desolate light that made them gleam like carrion wrapped in ancient metal. They cast no shadows. I noticed that weeks ago. They should cast shadows but don't. They take light, but do not give it back. Ahead, the air trembled with heat and dust. I smelled oil, leather, sweat, men, an imperial patrol, light cavalry by the look. 40 riders in the red and silver of Wissenland, sunbursts on their shields, purity scrolls fluttering on their shoulders. Their armor shone. Their horses were real, breathing, shivering, stamping the earth as the pale host approached. One of the riders urged forward a young officer, breastplate polished like a mirror, face set with the kind of youthful conviction that only gets men killed. He raised his voice. "In the name of the Empire," he called, "you will halt." Caeltheron did not. He did not even glance their way. His steps fell in perfect cadence with the hundreds behind him, bone and blade moving with the inevitability of a tide. The riders flinched as the sound of 1,000 skeletons grinding forward filled the space between heartbeats. "I said halt!" the officer bellowed again. His voice cracked slightly. One of the horses reared. The dead did not answer. They do not speak. They do not reason. They do not stop. I saw it in the officer's eyes as we got closer. The moment the conviction died, the moment the story he'd told himself that he was the righteous sword of man, standing tall before some heretical band of shamblers, crumbled under the weight of what he actually saw. A wall of ancient death. Armored. Armed. Remembering. He turned to give a third warning. He never finished it. There was a blur of movement ahead, no fanfare, no roar, just a sudden, graceful shift in the lines of the host. Caeltheron's bone knights surged forward. 12 of them, clad in black gold plate, etched with the glyphs of kingdoms buried beneath the Empire's bones. Their armor clattered like coffins dropped onto stone. They rode skeletal steeds whose hooves did not strike the ground so much as invade it, hoofprints filling not with dust, but with shadow. Their swords were long and notched, wrapped in old sinew. Their helms shaped like skulls within skulls. They did not charge. They descended. The patrol barely had time to scream. The first two riders were hit like insects swatted mid-gallop, their torsos liquefied under the blow of massive curved blades. A third was yanked off his mount by a knight's bony hand, dragged into the dust, and trampled. I heard his helmet crack, then his skull. The officer spun his mount, crying for retreat. Too late. The bone knights were in them now. Horses reared and fell. Blades clanged once, twice, then stopped ringing altogether, as the blood drowned out sound. The riders fought back, but their swords bounced off armor that had withstood empires. One knight took a lance full in the chest and didn't even slow. He simply reached out, broke the rider's arm at the elbow, and buried his sword through the man's throat. Not with rage, with purpose. Ritual. I stumbled sideways, tripping on a dry root. My knees hit the dust. Blood spattered across my face, hot and thick. I gagged. One of the horses, its rider long dead, galloped in panic toward me, eyes wild, foam lacing its mouth. A bone knight turned, lifted his sword, and with a single motion, cleaved the beast in half. It didn't scream this time. Its front half slid to the side, entrails dragging like ropes of red kelp. Its hindquarters collapsed beside me with a sickening thump. Blood pooled, mixing with the gray dust of the heath, until it looked like wet ash. I covered my eyes, but I couldn't stop watching. The ground became a canvas. Crimson brushstrokes over pale bone. Broken lances jutted from corpses like twisted markers. One rider was still alive, crawling through the gore, his lower half missing. He screamed, not in pain, but terror, begging, whimpering. A knight dismounted beside him. The dead don't gloat. They don't taunt. They don't monologue. They execute. The knight lifted his blade high, and the crawling man raised one hand, palm open. The blade came down. I turned away this time. It made no difference. The sound of the blade cleaving through bone and soil sank into my ears, into my thoughts, into the marrow of my very soul. I squeezed my eyes shut, so hard I saw stars, but the image burned behind my lids. The body, the blood, the precision. The Bone Knights did not pursue the last few riders who managed to flee. They turned back, their armor drenched in viscera, and rejoined the host without a word. Cael'Theron did not acknowledge them. The march never stopped. Not once. The pale host flowed around the carnage like a river around a stone. The broken bodies were simply left behind, cooling in the dirt. The birds returned after an hour, silent, black, hungry. I sat in the dust long after they passed. My hands were shaking, my robes soaked through with blood, not mine, my knees stiff with grime and sinew. I wanted to vomit again. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I stood, and I walked. I caught up to the host as night fell. The horizon was smeared with orange and smoke, the sky above darkening with stars that pulsed like watchful eyes. The Bone Knights rode at the flanks again, unmoving now, statues of dread and honor. Cael'Theron walked at the front. He did not look back. Why would he? This was not vengeance, not war, not conquest. It was remembrance. The patrol had not been an obstacle. They had been a footnote, a blood offering carved into the dust for a memory far older than any imperial uniform. We do not bring war. We do not carry hate. We carry the past. And the past does not ask permission to return. It simply arrives, and it watches you bleed. Chapter 6. Feast of the Carrion Seers. There are places in the world where even the dead will not linger. We came upon one such ruin at dusk, when the sun sat bleeding against the horizon like a wounded eye. The pale host slowed, not halted, not uncertain, but reverent, like monks approaching a black altar. Even Cael'Theron's stride shortened, just barely, as the first stones came into view. The structure, if it had ever been a structure, was now a shattered ring of obsidian spires, half sunk in a mire choked with bones. Not human, not entirely. The stones curved inward, jagged and sharp like the teeth of some fossilized god left, gnawing the land from the inside out. Glyphs lined every inch of them, burned, not carved. The edges shimmered with a sickly green light that flickered like a heartbeat, one that had not yet stopped. I had heard of this place once, only once, mentioned in a tale whispered through drink by an old soldier who later slit his own throat in a temple of Moor. The circle of the Carrion Seers. They were not necromancers, not as the Empire names them. They were older, pre-human, entities who had fed on the very echo of death itself. Where lesser mages channeled wind and shadow, the Carrion Seers gnawed on memory, belief, and the residue of grief. They did not raise the dead, they devoured them. And we were walking straight into their temple. As I followed the Wight King, the air grew thick. The wind died again, but not like before. This time, it choked. Every breath tasted like ash and old parchment. The sky dimmed, even as the sun clung to the edge of the world. There were no stars, no moon, just darkness, and the growing hum of voices. Not the host, not the dead, the others. At first, it was a whisper behind the ears, the rustle of a rotted finger against dry lips. Then it grew, 1,000 voices murmuring nonsense. Not language, not prayer, concept. Thoughts boiled into raw sound. Hunger, loss, regret, the scent of your mother's deathbed, the feel of your lover's throat beneath your fingers. A door creaking open long after the house was abandoned. I stopped walking. I couldn't help it. My legs refused to go forward. My mind recoiled. Caltheron did not pause. He stepped between the stones, and the air screamed. The sound was not made with mouths, but it existed. It rattled the teeth in my head. I dropped to my knees. My vision bent. The world folded. I saw bones growing from the stones, like veins, pulsing. I saw my own face in the moss, mouth stitched shut, eyes wide and screaming. Then came the touch, not physical, inside, fingers in my mind, peeling, searching, tasting. They pulled at my thoughts like worms through meat. My memories twisted first in flashes, then as floods. I saw my mother weeping over my corpse, though I had not yet died. I saw myself hang again from the barrow tree, this time laughing. I saw a child I never had scream my name in terror. Faces of people I never knew swirled in my vision, rotting and melting into one another. I could feel them picking through me, sucking meaning from every moment I'd ever lived. I screamed, not out loud, inside. The pale host continued, unaffected. The dead did not feel this place as I did. Or perhaps they remembered it too well. Shapes slithered from the ruins. Not ghosts, not quite. Things made of thought, of hunger, of twisted purpose. They moved with jerks and shudders, wrapped in strands of funeral silk and crowned in antlers made of teeth. Eyes burned with intellect long since broken. Not rage, not cruelty, curiosity. They saw Caltheron and his host, and did not attack. Instead, they welcomed. One of them approached the Wight King, bowed low, and placed a hand to its chest. Fingers fused together like roots, pulsing with runes beneath translucent skin. It spoke in a voice like the cracking of marrow. The path winds homeward. Caltheron did not reply. The creature turned, gestured. The host followed it into the ruin. I forced myself up, vomiting bile and blood as I stumbled behind. My legs did not feel like mine. My mouth did not taste like my own. My thoughts were not private. They watched from within. Not with malice, with fascination. They tasted my terror the way a scholar tastes wine. We descended into what remained of the seer's temple. It was no longer built of stone and shape. It had become a wound in the world, a hollow void carved out of reality, where thought congealed and rules bled. The dead spread out. They formed a ring around a central pit, where a black flame burned, flickering without light. The ground around it writhed faces and hands pressed against the soil from beneath, straining, screaming soundlessly. Not bodies, imprints, echoes of people devoured by the seers, left as memories etched into the land. Caltheron knelt before the flame. The seers gathered. They had no hierarchy, no names, just presence. Thought wraiths in tattered skin, orbiting the Wight King in spirals, too perfect to be random. One by one, they reached into the flame, drew forth globs of black fire, and smeared it across their skulls, moaning. They began to chant. It wasn't music. It was unmusic. The sound of silence curdling. Notes bent in ways that should not exist. I wept. My skin crawled. My thoughts spiraled. One of the seers looked at me and whispered my name. Not the one I bore now, the one I had before. A name I did not remember until it left their cracked lips. I dropped to my knees, screaming. Blood poured from my eyes. My hands clawed at my chest, as if to rip the memories out. They had taken something from me, some sacred forgotten piece, and left the hole yawning wide and raw. Caeltheron stood. The seers froze. One of them approached him. Their heads split open, not torn, but peeled like fruit. Inside was not flesh, but a void. A bottomless eye. It opened and gazed into Caeltheron's soul. The Wight King did not falter. After a long moment, the creature reached out and pressed its palm to his brow. The void closed. The seers dispersed. The rite was done. The Wight King turned, blade humming with something old and wet and wrong. The fire extinguished. The faces in the ground sighed and vanished. The host began to march again. As I left the ruin, I looked back. One of the seers stood watching me. Its head was tilted, its body shifting between forms. A mother, a stranger, a god. It whispered again. You will forget again. I stumbled into the cold light of dawn. My thoughts were my own again. But I did not remember what I had forgotten. The host walked on. Caeltheron said nothing. And in the ruins behind us, the seers feasted still. On me? Chapter 7. Hollow Men. It was near the 7th day since the feast of the Carrion Seers, though day means little anymore. Time has softened into a gray fog in my mind. Edges eroded like bones left in riverbeds. The march continues. Always. The pale host does not sleep. The Wight King does not pause. I do not remember the taste of bread, the warmth of a fire, my mother's voice. Today, I forgot the color of my own eyes. That was when I met the Hollow Men. The land we passed through was no longer empire, no longer claimed. Maps showed it as a tangle of broken hills and ancient woodland, the withered reach, if the tattered parchment I once stole was to be believed. But maps lie. They are built by men who do not walk the paths we walk now. This place remembered. It remembered Caeltheron, and it remembered those who followed. I saw them first at the edge of the woods, standing motionless in the fog like statues abandoned by time. At first, I thought them dead. Perhaps remnants of the pale host split from the main column, but their posture was wrong. They were too straight, too aware. Their eyes glinted. Living? They did not blink. The host did not acknowledge them. Caeltheron passed without pause. But as I drew closer, one of them turned toward me. His skin was the color of old wax, pulled tight across sharp bones. His mouth was lipless, teeth exposed. Yet breath rasped from his lungs like parchment tearing. His eyes were milky, not blind but exhausted, as if they had seen too much and begged for nothing more. He wore no armor, only layered cloth bound in bone charms and black thread. He smiled at me. It was a terrible smile, hollow, without warmth, but recognition lived there. I knew, somehow, that he had waited for me. For you walk his path, he croaked, voice thick with age and rot. And now, his path walks you. Another figure stepped from the mist, then another, then dozens. They circled me, not close, not threatening, just watching. They were all wrong. Living, yes. I saw chests rise and fall. I saw steam rise from their skin in the cold. But they were wrong. Too still. Too silent. Their movements lacked the twitch, the nervous tremble, the breath of thought that defines the living. I met their eyes and saw no fire, only embers buried deep, long cooled. Who are you? I asked, though the words felt childish in my mouth, like asking rain to explain why it falls. We are what remains, one replied. A woman this time, her face obscured by a veil of woven hair and bone. Her fingers were long and stained. "We were bound before Sigmar bled, before your empire dared write laws in ink, before your ancestors learned to shape iron." "You're not dead," I muttered, stepping back. "Not yet," another answered. "But neither are we alive." They did not smile, not truly. The expression that flickered across their faces was closer to memory than amusement, a mimicry of what they once were, or what I once was. "We are his thralls," they said together. "Many voices but one mouth, and you are becoming." One reached out and touched my arm. His skin was cold, not like the dead, but like stone left in moonlight. The touch burned, not with heat, but with familiarity. My vision blurred. I saw fields of bone. I saw Caltheron, not as he is, but as he was. Flesh-covered, glorious, his crown whole, his blade clean. I saw these men and women knelt around him in devotion, carving runes into their own flesh with obsidian knives. I saw them drink from the black river beneath his throne. I saw myself kneeling beside them. The vision shattered. I fell to my knees, gasping, chest heaving. "You remember, don't you?" the woman asked, voice thick with pity. "It's not your first march." I don't." My voice caught in my throat. "I was a peasant. I died a thief. I hung for stealing from the Wight King's barrow." They leaned closer. "No one steals from Caltheron," they whispered. "Only those called." I tried to speak. I couldn't. My mouth was dry. My teeth ached. One of the hollow men handed me a skin of something dark. I drank without thinking. It was thick. It tasted like iron and dirt, and dreams left to rot. But it filled me with silence. The whispering in my skull faded. The shadows in the corners of my eyes stilled. For the first time, since the cairn cracked open, I felt peace. I looked down and saw my hand. I did not recognize it. The skin was paler than I remembered. The fingers longer. The nails blackened slightly at the tips. My veins pulsed green. I traced the lines of my palm and felt them shift beneath my touch. I had forgotten the color of my eyes. Now I could not remember the shape of my face. The hollow men moved aside as Caltheron approached. He did not speak. He did not nod. But he paused, just for a breath, and the hollow men knelt. Not in worship, in acceptance. Caltheron looked down at me, and in that empty skull, in those burning hollows where eyes once lived, I saw not command. I saw recognition. We had done this before. I had followed this path before, and I would again. He turned. The host moved on. The hollow men faded into the fog. One lingered, a child, her hands missing fingers, her eyes like black pearls sunk in wax. She pointed at me. "You will forget again," she said. Then she was gone. I rose. I walked. My legs did not ache. My breath did not fog. The others made space for me in the line, and in the back of my throat, I tasted the black river still. We are not born to this path. We are remembered into it, and we are hollowed, piece by piece, until nothing remains but the march. Chapter 8. The Morning Song. It began with a stillness too heavy to be wind. We had marched through the twisted remnants of a long-dead forest, branches bare, bark flayed by centuries of forgotten fire. Not a single leaf touched the earth. The pale host did not disturb the dust. We passed into a narrow gorge, choked with stone monoliths, jutting like broken ribs from the earth. Cracked, sunken, covered in lichen that glowed faintly in shades no painter's hand could ever mimic. I did not know its name then, but I would soon learn to call it the Valley of Weeping Stones. The moment the first bone stepped across its threshold, the air collapsed inward. There was no thunder, no sudden rupture, only absence. The wind stalked. Birds fell dead from the sky, their wings seized mid-flap. Sound became brittle. My breath caught in my throat. Even my heartbeat hesitated. The pale host halted, without signal, without word. Caltheron moved forward alone. The Wight King's stride slow, his sword reversed, and dragging a thin trench in the stone. Sparks hissed from its point. Not of fire, but memory flashes of images I could not understand, moments lost in languages older than hate. He reached the heart of the valley. The monoliths formed a circle here. Natural or designed? It was impossible to say. Time had eaten the distinction. He raised his arms, not high, but enough that the plates of his corroded armor shifted with a sound like chains dragged across tombstone. Then the dead sang. It did not begin with voice, nor with instrument. It began with bone, thousands of them. Each ribcage, every skull, each finger and toe began to vibrate not randomly, but in deliberate choral resonance. The very structure of the pale host became an orchestra. Femurs hummed, sternums whined, spines groaned in long, low tones. The sound did not echo. It had no need to. It filled. I collapsed. Not from fear, not from pain, from grief. A weight fell over me, not physical but worse. A presence without shape, language, or mercy. It pressed against my chest, burrowed into my lungs, filled my stomach with cold. I began to cry. I didn't know why. There was no memory that sparked it. No trauma I could call upon. Just loss. Endless. Absolute. Like the last breath of a god who died screaming in the dark. Unheard. And then Caeltheron added his voice. It was not a voice meant for mortal ears. It was not a voice meant for this age. It was a keening, splitting note low and wet, cracked with dust and rot, yet endless. The kind of sound a mother might make when burying the last of her children. It vibrated the stone beneath me. The monoliths began to wail in sympathy. Thin hairline cracks spiderwebbing across their surfaces. The pale host joined him. Thousands of dead. Not all at once. In waves. In ritual. In remembrance. It was not a song in any human sense. No rhythm. No melody. Just rising. Falling tides of suffering. Of mourning. Of memory. Every note was a death. Every breathless chord a betrayal. Every pause, an empire collapsing into fire and forgetting. I screamed. My ears bled. My teeth ached as the resonance filled my skull. I tasted copper. My vision blurred, but I could not look away. In the song, I saw visions, not dreams. Truths. The world before light. Before gods. A time when the sky was closer, heavier, and the ground breathed like an animal. I saw men made of ash and bone carving their names into stone with blood because ink had not yet been born. I saw Caeltheron as he once was alive, vast, terrible, crowned in crows, carving law into the hearts of kings with a glance. I saw myself, again and again, as other things, not always a man, not always living. In one vision, I was a mouth in the soil, whispering spells as priests carved their chants into my tongue. In another, I was a burning figure upon a pyre, laughing as Caeltheron wept. In another still, I marched beside him in chains of gold, speaking a language without vowels. Each memory stabbed into me like iron spikes, anchoring me into a truth I had no words for. I had always followed him, and I always would. The song continued. Windows shattered in a distant village, far beyond the valley, though I did not know this until later. Men miles away fell dead in their beds, hearts bursting from the pressure. Cattle miscarried in the fields. Dogs howled, then tore at their own throats. Because the song was not meant for the living. It was meant for the land, for the stones. The monoliths cracked further, not from time, from awareness, as though they had slumbered for 1,000 years, and were only now waking to the realization of what they had forgotten and what they could never remember again. Caeltheron reached the crescendo of his lament. It was not a scream. It was an offering. He fell to one knee, his crown tilted forward. His sword sank deeper into the dust. The fire in his eyes dimmed, not with weakness, but with tribute. The song became pain itself, drawn from him, through the host, into the earth. And the valley wept. The stones bled. Thin rivulets of black ichor spilled from the cracks in the monoliths. seeping into the soil. I saw flowers bloom and wither in a single heartbeat. Trees shuddered, leaves turning to dust. Even the wind knelt. The host held the final note for what felt like an eternity. Then, silence. Total, not absence. Satiation. Calthron stood. The monoliths dimmed. And I, Bram, forgotten son of forgotten parents, lay sobbing into the dirt, hollowed by grief that was not mine. My face caked with tears and blood. My throat raw. My soul, if I still possessed one, ragged. The pale host did not speak, did not comfort. They simply began to move again. Calthron paused only long enough to cast a single glance behind. Not at me. At the stones. At what he had fed. At what now remembered him. We left the Valley of Weeping Stones as we found it shattered, silent. But the world was not the same. The sun rose slower that day. The birds did not sing. The sky bled purple for an hour before fading to gray. And I walked, empty, weeping still, for I had heard the morning song, and I knew its truth. The dead do not grieve the living, they grieve themselves. Chapter 9. The pale host turns west. There was a moment brief, brittle, born of fear and hope when the world believed we would strike the heart of the Empire. For days, the pale host had moved inexorably north, carving a black path through forest, field, and forgotten land, drawing ever closer to the border holds and trade arteries of the Grand Provinces. Dust choked the air, carried on a wind that did not shift. Crops shriveled. Wells turned sour. Children were born still, wrapped in membranes of skin that pulsed like they'd forgotten how to die. And in the cities, they watched. From the spires of Wissenberg and the walls of Feldorf, from the steeples of shrines and the high towers of Templars, they watched the dead draw near. Panic bloomed like a cancer. And still, we marched. Torch lines lined the roads. Watchfires burned through the night, though nothing came from the dark but silence. Horses bolted. Whole townships emptied. Merchant caravans turned east, abandoning wares to rot. Refugees clogged the arteries of civilization, trailing behind in endless lines, fleeing not armies but memory. Witch hunters were seen riding in pairs, clad in black and brass, bearing pistols etched with wards and prayers long obsolete. In temples, priests of Sigma screamed of damnation, rattling relics and swinging incense censers heavy with alchemical smoke. They shouted from pulpits, voices raw, damning the dead with scriptures older than their tongues. "This is no crusade," they cried. "It is the reckoning." They were wrong. We did not march to the cities. We turned west. I remember the moment it happened, clearer than my own birth, clearer than my own name. The host reached a crossroads, an ancient point of division once marked by a crude stone obelisk, now worn down to a smooth curve by centuries of rain and neglect. Roads split in three directions, one toward Wissenberg, one toward the eastern trade routes, and the last a narrow, cracked path of half-buried cobble led into the Worm Hollow Hills, a place so old it no longer bore a name on any imperial parchment. Calthron paused at the stone. The host halted. The silence stretched. Even the birds held their breath. Then, with no fanfare, the Wight King raised one hand and turned west, not toward conquest, not toward blood, but toward the Ashen Barrow. I felt it. Before I understood it, a pull in my gut, as if something long dead beneath the earth stirred at the very thought of being remembered. The barrow was not a place the Empire recognized. It bore no tower, no gate, no walls. It did not appear in records or maps, but the land knew. The soil ached for our arrival. The roots twisted in anticipation. The very sky dimmed. Even now, as I write this beneath the hollowed carcass of a dead tree, I struggle to explain what the Ashen Barrow is. Not a tomb, a cradle, of kings before kings, of gods before thrones. Calthron's bloodkin slept there, heirs to a lineage too old to carry names. Their bones carved in runes from a tongue older than the moon's. Their deaths not final but ritual. They had not perished. They had retreated into the barrow, into time, into the promise of return. The world had forgotten them. But we had not. As we turned from the cities, I heard the screams behind us, of priests betrayed by their own prophecies, of soldiers who'd stood ready to bleed only to be ignored, of cities that had prepared for siege and found instead only silence, the footsteps of the host fading into mist. Witch hunters cursed us as cowards. Scholars trembled, understanding too late, because they were not the target. They were not worthy. We did not march to conquer. We marched to witness. As we crossed into the Worm Hollow, the land changed. The grass grew gray. The sky sank lower. Stones stood at unnatural angles, half buried in the earth like teeth. Pools reflected stars that had not risen. The trees whispered not in wind, but in sighs of regret. Even the dead grew quieter. The host's bones no longer clattered. Their armor no longer rang. Every step became muffled, as though the very world had wrapped itself in mourning cloth. Caeltheron walked with head bowed, his sword sheathed, his crown glinting only faintly. His fire dimmed, but not from weakness, from reverence. He neared the end of his road, and as he marched, the hollow men returned. Dozens, then hundreds, emerging from the rocks, the trees, the earth itself, still living, still bound, thralls who had never left. Their skin stretched, their eyes dulled by centuries of vigil. They knelt in the fields as the host passed. Some wept, others sang. None spoke. I saw one draw a blade across his palm and smear the blood across a stone carved with Caeltheron's sigil, an Ouroboros of bone wrapped in chains. The stone drank the blood. The sigil glowed briefly. The man collapsed, smiling. The dead around him bowed. I asked one of the hollow men, a woman whose face was more scar than flesh, what awaited us at the Ashen Barrow. She did not answer. She only said, "It remembers him. It needs him." And she was right. The land remembered Caeltheron, not as conqueror, not as tyrant, but as kin. We reached the outer threshold of the barrow near dusk. It was not marked by gates or walls, but by a sudden shift in reality, a thinning. The world became fragile, colors bled. The wind tasted of iron. Shadows warped and bent in loops. Light fell at strange angles. We walked into the barrow's breath, into its expectation. And Caeltheron began to speak. His voice rolled over us, not as sound, but as intention. It seeped into our skulls, into our marrow. Not a command, not a curse. A liturgy of what was, of what had been broken, of what must be remembered. I understood then. This was not a tomb. This was a womb. For the dead gods of Caeltheron's line to rise again, they must be sung into awakening. And we who march, who remember, who weep, we are the choir. The pale host gathered at the edge of the Ashen Barrow. The hollow men knelt. Caeltheron raised his arms. The sky screamed. The world shuddered. And the earth began to open. We do not march to conquer. We march to resurrect. Chapter 10. The Field of 1,000 Wounds. There is a sound to fear that no man forgets. It is not the clatter of armor or the creak of bowstring. It is not the barked orders of officers or the rattle of sabers. It is silence, the kind that comes not from calm, but from certainty. The certainty of men who believe their cause is just, their gods at their backs, their enemy doomed. We reached that silence just after dawn. The sun broke like a blood blister over the jagged hills. Its light diffused through red clouds that had not moved for 3 days. The host descended a low ridge, emerging into a bowl of trampled grass and old battlefield scars, ringed on all sides by skeletal trees and the bones of wars gone cold. A wide plain, scoured by time and ash. The edge of Wissenland. And across it, waiting for us, stood the Empire, a host unlike any we had yet seen. Thousands of soldiers in black and crimson, arrayed in perfect lines beneath a banner of the twin-tailed comet and the sunburst. Cannon batteries gleamed on the ridge behind them. Handgunners bristled in staggered formations. Knights of the blazing sun formed the vanguard, their armor polished to mirror light, helmets plumed in white and red, lances like the spears of angels. They had come not to question, they had come to kill. At the center of their line stood a man atop a white horse. flanked by 2 witch hunters and a battle priest who held a relic aloft, a skull of gold set with sapphire eyes. The man bore no helmet, only a silver circlet denoting command. His face was chiseled, stern, unreadable, a general of the Empire, a man who had read the reports, heard the wails, seen the crows flee, and still stood, his gaze fixed on Caltheron, and he raised a hand, a signal, no words. But I knew what it meant. I stumbled forward from the ranks of the pale host, gasping, my voice thin and raw. I screamed as loud as my lungs would allow, arms waving, blood still caked to my sleeves. "No," I howled. "You don't understand. Turn back. We don't want." The general lowered his hand. The first volley hit seconds later. I don't remember hitting the ground. I only remember the sound, the scream of steel through air, the thunder of black powder, the horrific whine of cannonballs ripping through soil and bone. The pale host did not scream. They simply broke, limbs torn, shields shattered, skulls split. And still they did not fall. They reformed. The cannonballs crushed lines of skeletal warriors, and still they marched. Arrows peppered the sky like sleet, but not a single step wavered. The dead did not cry out, did not flinch. They accepted the violence with the solemnity of monks accepting communion. Caltheron did not move. Not yet. He stood at the forefront of the host, still and grave, his hands resting on the pommel of his sheathed blade. The Empire fired again. The thunder cracked across the field, like the wrath of Sigmar himself. The impact was ruinous. Earth exploded. Entire phalanxes of the pale host disappeared in gouts of fire and shrapnel. Bloodless, but not painless. And yet they endured. One bone knight rose from the crater of a direct hit, his shield incinerated, half his helm gone. He staggered, straightened, and rejoined the formation as if nothing had happened. Another dragged the lower half of his body behind him, refusing to fall. Their discipline was not human. It was not taught. It was remembered. Caltheron stepped forward and unsheathed his sword. I had never seen it drawn. None of us had. It was not a weapon of war. It was a key. The blade was longer than a man's arm, curved slightly, black as charred bone. The edge shimmered, not with light, but with unlight, a sheen of anti-glare that devoured the sun's reflection. The runes on its length ignited in sequence, one by one, like the eyes of buried kings opening beneath the dirt. Caltheron raised it, and the world broke. The grass died, not burned, not crushed, withered. A wave spread outward from his feet, a circle of decay that cracked the soil, shattered stone, and turned the very air brittle. Trees hundreds of feet away bent backward, their trunks splitting with dry, papery screams. The pale host howled. Their song was not music. It was history. It was war. It was a dirge so potent the air thickened. I could feel the blood in my veins curdle, pulled toward that blade like iron to a magnet. The sky turned gray. The clouds spiraled. The birds fell from the heavens in mid-flight, limp. And then the Wight King charged. He did not run. He descended. Across the earth, impossibly fast, cloak billowing like wings of smoke, eyes burning like twin suns eclipsed. The pale host followed. I watched the Empire hold for the first few moments. The first line of soldiers braced, shields raised, halberds ready. They were vaporized. Caltheron's blade fell once, just once, and the first rank of men ceased to exist, their bodies unmade, not split or shattered, but removed from the page of reality like ink wiped from parchment. Their bones did not fall, their armor did not clatter. They were simply gone. The line behind them broke. Then chaos. The host collided with the army like a flood of silence. Bone against steel, undeath against doctrine. The knights of the blazing sun charged, righteous fury in their hearts. They were consumed. One bone knight skewered a charging steed and its rider in a single sweep. Another smashed a hammer into the chest of a priest, cracking his ribs into dust. The witch hunters fired blessed bullets. Some struck true. The dead laughed. I watched one of them, a colossal figure in dented plate, lift a soldier by the throat and stare into his eyes for a long, terrible moment before biting his face off. The screaming became uncountable. Men threw down their weapons. Some fled. Others knelt and prayed, piss soaking their greaves. It didn't matter. The Pale Host was not an army. It was a judgment. Caeltheron reached the general. They exchanged no words. The Wight King raised his sword. And the general, to his credit, did not flee. He raised his own blade, shouted something I could not hear. Caeltheron bisected him cleanly. His body fell in halves, still clutching the hilt of his sword, his eyes wide with a final, tragic realization that he had never mattered. The battle ended within minutes. It was not a fight. It was a lesson. The Pale Host stood amidst the ruin, black soil, torn limbs, the stink of blood and bile. Smoke curled into a sky that no longer seemed interested in rising. The field drank deeply. 1,000 soldiers dead, 1,000 wounds in the Empire's pride. Caeltheron said nothing. He lowered his blade, and the land wept, not with rain, but with dust. The field of 1,000 wounds had earned its name, and I, Bram, who once begged these men to turn away, now walked through the remains of their defiance. The past had returned, and it had no mercy.